On today's show, over 10 potential ownership groups submitted bids for the 16th WNBA team. How did we get here? And who has the best pitch? Also, who is winning the Unrivaled 1v1 tournament? The Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast. It starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball. I'm Jackie Powell, and happy Friday. I'm one of your hosts on the program. I cover the New York Liberty at the Next, and I've covered women's basketball and its culture nationally at many other places. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And joining me for the first time on Locked On Women's Basketball is Ben Pickman from The Athletic. Ben, hello. How goes it?
I'm doing well, Jackie. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So on our show in segment 1, we are going to outline what is the, arms race for the WNBA's 16th team and what that looks like. And then in segment 2, we'll go over what makes a good expansion team bid. Ben and I will play Commissioner, which is going to be very fun. And then in segment 3, we'll hop over to Unrivaled, where tonight there will be a 1v1 champion named. We'll give our keys and predictions for the Final Four. So anyway, let's begin. So Ben, I think where I want to start is if you could explain to the listeners why we've seen all of these news stories pop up where it's like, X ownership group from X city has put in their bid for the 16th WNBA team. I feel like we've seen so many stories with different groups in so many cities. Why is this happening now? And has this ever happened before?
I mean, the simple explanation as to why now, I think, is the same explanation that explains a lot of our lives and how people operate. It is deadlines, because according to the reporting from myself, my colleague Mike Vorkunov, that bids for the 16th WNBA franchise were due on January 30th. And so we certainly saw a number of prospective groups who are interested in this 16th team announce publicly in the days leading up to or right on that day of the deadline that they were throwing their hat in the ring and had officially filed formal bids with the WNBA. That was certainly the case with Nashville, for instance, who, is this group that is trying to name its team after Pat Summitt. The Detroit Pistons publicly announced that they had made a formal bid for a franchise. And so teams really, as the deadline approached, made it public that they were bidding. Per Mike and I, in our reporting, we were told that there are more than 10 bids that the WNBA received for this 16th team. Mike and I confirmed 9 of those bids, and that ranges. There are a number of different ownership groups involved in those bids, right? They range from NBA ownership groups, say in Detroit and Cleveland. The Sixers have thrown their hat in the ring to file a formal bid. There are independent groups in Denver, for instance. Austin is kind of a mix of Kevin Durant is involved. Mark Lazary, who used to be involved with the Bucks, is involved in that group. Charlotte also has a bid. So there's 9 players who are kind of that we know of that have thrown their hat in the ring. We believe there to be more. Kansas City, Nashville, those are some of the more independent ones, not NBA affiliated. But you're right, Jackie. There is a ton of interest in this 16th franchise. And no, I don't really think we have seen as much interest as we currently are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been incredibly striking and interesting to see how these different groups have promoted these bids, what they've said, which you alluded to. You have the group in Nashville saying, hey, we have our name already. which is interesting because, as we've seen the expansion process under current Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, you've sort of seen, okay, the city, they make their pitch, and then, they're named as the new team, and then there's a process to name that team. So it was interesting to see, okay, this group they're ahead of the game. I think what I want to understand, and I think you started laying this out, what trends did you notice in the 9 bids that you and Mike were able to report about? And for the listeners, I will have a link to this very thorough piece in the show notes where Ben and Mike go through the 9 bids and sort of explain what we know about this expansion process. But anyway.
Yeah, in terms of commonalities, there are a couple buckets, right? You have, as I mentioned, Philadelphia, Houston, Detroit, Cleveland are all NBA affiliated groups. The Charlotte group seems, from what we understand, the Charlotte Hornets are supporting, backing the group in Charlotte, but Erica Berman is leading that group. She is not, I believe, a majority governor, say, of the Charlotte Hornets. You have an independent group in Denver, not affiliated with any of the sports teams there or the Denver Nuggets. You have the Kansas City group, which is led by Kansas City Current, the NWSL, their co-owners, Angie Long, Chris Long, Brittany Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes, some names you'll recognize there. You have an independent group in Nashville, which is led by Bill Haslam, who's the owner of the Nashville Predators. So that's a hockey group, obviously, and that would present an interesting partnership for the WNBA. And then Austin, as I mentioned it earlier, so far from what we understand, it's kind of a mixed group where you have former Bucks co-owner Mark Lazary is the lead investor in that group, but you also have someone like Kevin Durant who's involved, and Fran Harris, the former Texas player and Houston Comets player as well in the WNBA. So there is a wide variety to all of these groups.
So coming up, we are going to get into a little bit more of what makes a compelling bid for a WNBA expansion team. Now that we know that there are over 10 and you and Mike have reported on 9 of them, that's a lot to go through to try to figure out, okay, what is going to be the best option in this 16th spot. And then Ben and I are going to play Commissioner, which will be fun. If we were Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, which group would we choose? But first, I do want to talk to you all about our good friends at DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-2025 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. Here are a few ways you can take advantage of this deal. Game day feast. After an epic 50-point performance, celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot, delivered straight to your door. Late night cravings. Whether you're staying up, watching highlights, or need a midnight snack, use Dash Pass to grab something delicious while saving big. Or you can fuel your watch party. Planning to catch the next game? Order your go-to snacks and meals at a discount and get ready for more high-scoring action. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off and order the next day. That's up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. You must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. Thank you, DoorDash. We appreciate you. And now I am back with Ben Pickman of The Athletic. And we have been talking about this race for the 16th team in the WNBA. So all things WNBA expansion. So Ben, I think where I want to start here is, what are some of the factors that the league office considers when they are given a bid for a new WNBA team?
It's a good question, Jackie, and I think it is a question that you have heard some of the answer to, like me, in many press conferences over the years from Cathy Engelbert. I mean, she has talked about a franchise's arena, their practice facility, player experience amenities, and ownership's commitment, city demographics, and really her favorite word throughout the whole process is psychographics, which in layperson's terms is, I guess, market research into, lifestyle and values and interests that people in a city have. So those are all some of the factors that she has thrown out time and time again as they have evaluated at least teams 13 through 15. And I think it is fair to expect them to be key factors again in team 16.
Okay. So when it comes to discussing the factors that Cathy Engelbert looks at, what I guess are some, when you look at the current expansion teams in Golden State and Portland and Toronto, what I guess do those three share that might help us understand where the league might go with spot 16?
Sure. I mean, the big thing that I think they all share that is most important here, because I think in the end, money talks in this conversation, is that they share ties to the NBA. Joe Lacob, the majority owner of the Golden State Valkyries, well, he's also the majority owner of the NBA's Golden State Warriors. Larry Tannenbaum and Kilmer Sports Ventures, they also own and operate the NBA's Toronto Raptors, as well as now the Toronto Tempo. The Bethal family, Lisa and Alex, they are going to be the majority owners, the governors of the Portland WNBA franchise. Their family is an investor in the NBA's Sacramento Kings, and their father specifically, Raj, is the Kings' principal co-owner, and he serves as the alternate to Vivek Ranadive on the NBA's Board of Governors. So you have three groups in 13, 14, and 15 that all have ties to the NBA. So it wouldn't be shocking then to see Team 16 follow suit. And we actually saw, and we have this quote in our story on the expansion team, Adam Silver kind of acknowledged Tom Gores, for instance, specifically on a Detroit Pistons, I think it was a telecast. He talked about how, it might just be a matter of when and not if Detroit comes, gets back into the WNBA game. And what is their tie? Well, Tom Gores, the majority owner of the Detroit Pistons, is interested in a WNBA franchise. So clearly there is some tie here between the NBA and the WNBA. Now, it wouldn't be totally shocking, I guess, to see some of these groups that aren't NBA affiliated get one of these teams. As we know, not every ownership group currently in the WNBA has NBA ties, but a number of them do, and the expansion groups do. So, if recent history is any teacher, you can look to an NBA group. But again, there are some groups in this conversation without direct NBA ties.
And one of them is the Kansas City group, which I know you and Mike had a lot of writing and reporting about. I guess, what to you stands out about the Kansas City group, and what do you think they have going for them?
Sure. It's a Kansas City group that is, again, supported by the current owners of the Kansas City Current in the NWSL. And they've been a really successful franchise just in terms of revenue generation. And they actually have their own stadium, which was a really big deal when they built that these past couple years. They have a couple things that they kind of stress as some of the selling points. Number one, it is the success of the Kansas City Current and the ability for them to generate revenue. Two, they tried to stress that the geography, right, that there isn't another WNBA franchise within 400 miles of Kansas City. And so they're not just being kind of a city's hub, but they can be kind of a regions team in the middle of the country that, might be underserved as a WNBA market currently. The two other things they stressed is that like some of these other franchises, they have a arena that they are targeting to play in, T-Mobile Center, which is a professional, high-quality arena. But key to them, and this is something we can talk about too, Jackie, is they also have a practice facility plan. And their plan would be to build a 60,000 square foot privately financed practice facility on land that they already own. So, we have certainly seen in the WNBA, even of current existing teams, practice facilities has become a big topic of conversation, and where to build some of those practice facilities in some urban markets like Los Angeles or Chicago, for instance, has become topics of conversation. And so I think Kansas City really wanted to get across publicly that not only do they have a site picked out, but they actually already own the land. It would be on the same land as the current facility. How's that for a little bit of tongue twister? But we should note it's a little bit, exactly. We should note it's a little bit different in that scenario than what Portland is doing. Portland just announced their facility, and Portland is a franchise. Yes, they have these ties to the Kings, but they also own the city's Portland Thorns, the NWSL franchise there. And they are going to build this kind of share complex between the Thorns and the WNBA franchise. They would each obviously, the Thorns would use the soccer fields, the WNBA team would use the basketball courts, but they would share things like dining facilities. They would share things like, some training facilities. They would just have separate entrances. This situation in Kansas City, separate, but on the same plot of land.
Interesting. So what I find very, interesting about the Kansas City bid is I think a little bit about potential politics that might be involved. And I think it's worth bringing this up because one of the, more key moments in modern WNBA history was when the members of the Atlanta Dream campaigned against their former owner, Kelly Loeffler, in the 2020 bubble. And she was a Republican that was running against many of the beliefs of many WNBA players. And so with the Kansas City ownership group, you have Brittany Mahomes, who is Patrick Mahomes' wife. And I believe it's pretty clear that she is not only a supporter of President Donald Trump, or I'm not sure if she has donated or whatnot, but she has made it known that she is a supporter of his. And so my concern is you have, I would argue, the majority of the WNBA not in support of the current administration. What could happen? Could there be some sort of tension like what we saw in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, it is a good question. I don't think we're privy to the answer here. I mean, sure. Look, the reality is you have the WNBA already operating in states whose policies, some of their policies or top government officials might have different political perspectives and leanings than, the players with some of these WNBA franchises, right? And Kansas City, is not the only group that I think you can raise some of these questions about, right? You look at a state like North Carolina, for instance, or another team in Texas, right? I mean, I think you have asked and others have asked about some legislation in the state of Texas as it relates to the Dallas Wings or potentially holding all-star games in some states with more conservative policies that go against kind of the perspectives that so many WNBA players support. So, I think it is a super valid question to ask. Is it going to be a factor? Who's to say? But I do think, maybe that is why they are stressing some of these other factors. And in the end, look, I think the reality here is we'll see who bids the most. We'll see how this process plays out. And money might just be the difference here. And, we'll see what kind of group they choose, the league chooses, as a result of that too.
Yeah. Well, before we go to our second break, Ben and I are going to play a little game of Commissioner, or we're going to pretend to be Cathy Engelbert. And out of all of the bids that we know about, we're going to give our perspective. So Ben, I'm going to toss it over to you first to, if you were Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, which group, which city would be awarded this 16th team?
It's a good question. I'm just happy, Jackie, like you, there is a team currently in New York City. That is the selfish convenience that I know we both take advantage of during summers here. I do expect, though, I think it's going to be an Eastern Conference team, right? Whether it's Detroit or Cleveland or Philadelphia. From a travel standpoint, Philadelphia would be great. I would love to go see a WNBA team in Philly, but I think seeing one of these historic franchises return, whether that's in Cleveland or Detroit, could be kind of pretty cool, especially if they pay homage to the history of either of those teams.
My choice is Philadelphia. And the reason I pick Philly is because it is the largest media market on the board. And I think with the most recent Super Bowl, we've seen that Philly fans are very loyal and they are very animated. And I feel like those folks would love a WNBA team. Obviously, there are a couple of star players from the Philly area. Obviously, Kalia Copper, Natasha Cloud is another one. And I don't know. I mean, I could be going out on a limb here, but would Dawn Staley ever leave South Carolina to coach a Philly WNBA team if there was a lot of money involved? I don't know. That would be pretty cool.
It's a good question, Jackie. I think she'd probably leave to coach the Eagles if she was given that opportunity. I think she might have traded the Eagles Super Bowl win for South Carolina's loss to Texas on Sunday if we're giving her a little bit of truth serum.
Oh, of course. Of course. I think that the only question with Philly is obviously Comcast is part of this ownership group that is bidding. So it's interesting you have a media company that is a part of this. And there will be a new arena built for the 76ers and potentially this WNBA team. But what isn't clear is the practice facility. And as you alluded to before, sometimes with these bigger cities and bigger media markets, it's more expensive to purchase land and build something on land. So that might be a bit of a con for the Philly group. But anyway, coming up, we're going to change gears and talk a little bit about Unrivaled and the culmination of the one-on-one tournament. So we will be back in a moment. First, I want to chat about our good friends at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is quite easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. On Sunday, on the women's college basketball side, there are 3 top 25 matchups to watch out for when it comes to game odds. You have North Carolina State against UNC, LSU against Texas, and of course, Uconn versus South Carolina. Right now, FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your one shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you, FanDuel. And I am back with Ben Pickman of The Athletic. And so let's talk a little Unrivaled. So we have the final 4 players that are jockeying for this giant cash pool. And so in the first matchup tonight, it is Azurá Stevens versus Napheesa Collier. And then you have Aaliyah Edwards versus Arike Ogunbowale. So let's do keys and predictions. So Ben, what are the keys for both players in this first matchup with Azurá Stevens and Napheesa Collier?
I mean, Azurá Stevens is the longer player, and Fee has recognized that. But Fee might be the best player in the world right now with the most unstoppable single move in her turnaround jumper, kind of at the high post area at either elbow in the sport. And so it will be interesting to see if Azurá Stevens has any way to stop that shot that everyone knows is coming, but seemingly no one can stop it. I'm not going to bet on that, spoiler, in terms of my prediction here. But, Fee is just such a dynamic player, both from the perimeter, but also can put it on the floor and really get to her spots that, I think the onus is on Azurá Stevens to try and be as physical as possible and see if she can disrupt any kind of rhythm that Fee has and hope that fatigue also then plays a factor in this semifinal affair.
It was really interesting to listen to Azurá speak about this matchup and talk about her strategy and how she doesn't always run back to defend. She walks. And so that's really, I found that fascinating because, this could very much so be a game of pace. So when it comes to keys, I mean, a key for Fee is she has to pace herself and also use her wingspan to try to block some of those threes that come from Azurá. Because I believe against Ray Burrell, she gave Azurá just a lot of space. So I have a prediction for this one. I think Fee advances on a free throw, but she gets her biggest challenge against her former college teammate.
I mean, I also have Fee here. I hope it doesn't end on a free throw, Jackie. I am not a fan of the free throw endings in this Unrivaled one-on-one tournament.
That's fair. I mean, it's very anticlimactic. I see it, but I think it's just going to be so close because I think Fee is going up against a player that has a similar frame and a similar game. So I think there will be a bit more of a challenge, but I could be completely wrong. Now, I mean, was completely wrong about Breanna Stewart and her chances in this tournament. Speaking of the player that beat her 12-0, Aaliyah Edwards, is taking on Arike Ogunbowale. What are your keys for this one, Ben?
I mean, for me, this is a fascinating matchup because we have seen some of the smaller guards in this bracket, in this tournament overall, struggle compared to bigger wings and bigger forwards. Of course, not every guard has the skill set and repertoire that Arike Ogunbowale has, right? And so she might be the most dynamic scorer in this whole tournament, but she is just 5'8", 5'9" compared to, a power forward in Aaliyah Edwards. So the size is really the thing that sticks out to me. And, can Arike trade threes for twos in this context, right? Can she get hot, hit 2-3 3-pointers from the perimeter? Can she force a miss or 2 or 3 and hold her ground on the low block? That's kind of what I'm looking for as it relates to this matchup.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, but then again, as we saw in the matchup against Stewie, Aaliyah Edwards can hit a jab step 3, which I saw that I was like, okay, I guess this is what you've been working on. But I mean, it's really interesting because when Arike spoke about the lead up to this, she just sort of said that, she plays her game. There isn't a lot of strategy that she's thinking about. So I just wonder how Aaliyah Edwards could use that to her advantage. But if we're talking predictions, I see Aaliyah Edwards moving on. I see her out-muscling Arike by rebounding the ball well and having more high percentage shots fall. So I'm predicting that Edwards wins. What is it? Is it 12 or 11? So 11-6. That's what I will say.
Wow. I'm going to take Arike Ogunbowale here. She was my pick to win the tournament heading in, and I have seen nothing to dissuade me from that prediction, despite what I just said about forwards having some of the success against some of the guards.
All right. So in the final then, so what's the prediction? So Arike versus Fee. Who wins that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I picked Arike heading in. So, again, I'm going to take her in the final, I think, out of principle. But if my head is really thinking straight at this point, it's hard to bet against Napheesa Collier, too, because she can get to her spots. She can shoot over smaller players. She can shoot it from the perimeter if she needs to. She has been so good during the Unrivaled regular season, so good during this tournament that picking her is the prediction, I think, of these two. But I'm still going to stick to my guns with Arike, the player who can get hot and score, 34 and a half in an all-star game, 21 and a quarter like nobody else in the W. So I'm sticking with my pre-tournament pick, and I will go down on the sword if necessary.
Sounds good to me. I'm thinking it's going to be Fee against Aaliyah in the final, with Fee prevailing. So we will see. We will see. Anyway, thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. I want to give a huge thank you to Ben Pickman for hopping on the show. Ben, where can all of the dear listeners find your work?
You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Ben Pickman, at The Athletic, which is NewYorkTimes.com/athletic. And you can listen to our podcast, The Athletic Women's Basketball Show, which is twice weekly, interviews, chat show, with all your favorite figures in women's basketball. So there as well.
That sounds great. I will put the links to those in the show notes. Anyway, this has been Jackie Powell and
Ben Pickman.
And we are signing off. Have a great weekend, everyone.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.